A cold case that goes back 5 decades is solved. Westminster police say they now know who killed 20-year-old Teree Becker.
She was last seen on the 4th of December in 1975, last seen hitchhiking to see her boyfriend at the Adams County Jail in Brighton.
In 1978, Westminster, Colorado, 23-year-old Teree Becker's body was discovered in a remote area and left her family and friends devastated. At first, investigators had a few promising leads, but the case quickly turned cold with no progress. With no apparent motive and little evidence, the investigation hit dead ends for decades. Despite numerous attempts to reopen the case, it seemed as though Teree's killer would never be found. What led the investigation to stall for so long, and how did the truth finally come to light after more than 48 years? On December 6, 1975, a discovery that would shake the city to its core was revealed in a way no one could have predicted. 2 local citizens were riding their motorcycles when they unknowingly discovered a lifeless body. It was the body of a young woman, and they found it in a remote field at the intersection of 100th Avenue and Low Boulevard. The isolated location was far from the busy life of the town, which seemed like the last place for something so grim. It started a mystery that would haunt the community for 50 years. The question was, who was this woman? How did she end up there? And who was responsible? An autopsy performed on the body confirmed the devastating truth, and she had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. The details of the crime were shocking, but despite early efforts by the police, the case quickly went cold.
The police department just solved their oldest cold case, a murder that's nearly half a century old. It took dozens of detectives, thousands of hours, and a case file over 3,000 pages to find justice for Teree Becker.
The discovery of the body raised more questions than answers. It was clear that she had been murdered, but there was little to go on in terms of leads or evidence. The location where she was found suggested that her body had been discarded, and her personal belongings, which included her clothing, were left behind in a manner that suggested foul play. The case quickly became a subject of intense speculation, with the local community questioning who would have targeted such a vibrant young woman and why. The woman found in the field was later identified as Teree Becker. Teree Becker was born and raised in Casper, Wyoming, and she had a reputation for being outgoing and adventurous. She grew up in a close-knit family with her parents, a brother, and a sister. Teree attended Kelly Walsh High School in Casper, where she was known for her free-spirited nature. After high school, she moved to Denver, Colorado, and worked for a time at a local newspaper. Her family described her as a person who lived life on the edge, always eager to meet new people and start conversations with anyone she encountered. Her warm, engaging personality made her well-liked by those who knew her. She loved the arts, particularly painting, and was a passionate music listener. Sadly, Teree's life took a tragic turn in early December 1975. On December 4th, she was last seen hitchhiking toward Brighton, Colorado. She had plans to visit her boyfriend, who was imprisoned at the Adams County Jail. She was last known to be heading toward a detention center, but after that, no one knew where she went or what had happened to her. 2 days later, her body was discovered in an isolated field, which was far from where she had been last seen. The investigation into Teree Becker's death was thorough, but it provided no clear answers. Law enforcement agencies worked tirelessly to piece together her last known movements and to interview anyone who might have had information about her time in Denver or her trip to Brighton. Yet, despite their best efforts, the case remained unsolved. Over the years, the mystery of Teree Becker's murder would haunt the small town, with each passing year adding to the weight of uncertainty for her family, friends, and the community at large. Over the years, multiple investigations and reviews turned up few clues, and the identity of Teree's killer remained a mystery. Her family, friends, and the community were left struggling with the brutal murder of a young woman and still unsure of who had taken her life or why. For nearly 30 years, the case stayed unsolved. The police continued to follow different leads, but there were no major breakthroughs. Then, in 2003, a new technology gave a tiny spark of hope. Forensic experts were able to extract DNA from evidence found at the crime scene, specifically from semen on Teree's body. The DNA profile of the unknown male suspect was entered into national crime databases. This was an important step, as DNA analysis had become a powerful tool for solving cold cases. However, despite the new evidence, the databases found no matches. The mystery of Teree Becker's murder seemed as far from being solved as ever, and the case faded further into the background. However, in 2013, an unexpected turn of events had restarted the investigation. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department reviewed this cold case from 1991. In May 1991, officers responded to a suspicious murder report at an apartment on West Monroe Avenue near Owens and H Street. Upon arrival, they found Bridgewater's body, which was positioned in a way that suggested sexual assault. It was the brutal murder of Sherry Bridgewater, and they submitted DNA evidence from her crime scene for reanalysis. Sherry had been found raped and murdered in her apartment, and like Teree Becker's case, her murder had gone unsolved for 33 years. When the DNA from Sherry's case was compared to the profile in Teree Becker's case, the shocking truth emerged, and the two cases were linked. The DNA from both crime scenes matched. Though investigators still had no idea who this person was, it was determined that the same unknown male had committed both murders. This connection was a major breakthrough in the investigation. It meant that the person responsible for Teree Becker's murder had also killed Sherry Bridgewater in Las Vegas and possibly other victims too. Despite this new lead, the killer's identity remained unknown. Investigators faced the difficult task of finding him, but they struggled because there was no direct match in the DNA databases and no other strong evidence. Still, the fact that the same person had murdered two women in different states gave new hope for solving both cases. The case took another significant leap forward in 2018, when Teree Becker's case was submitted for genetic genealogy testing. Genetic genealogy, which has seen growing success in solving cold cases, uses DNA evidence to trace familial connections through public genealogical databases. By searching for distant relatives of the suspect, investigators can construct a family tree and narrow down potential suspects. This new investigative tool had already proven invaluable in solving high-profile cases, and law enforcement hoped it would help them finally reveal the identity of the person responsible for Teree's and Sherry's murders. This connection was a major breakthrough in the investigation. The new breakthrough came in 2023 when they were able to identify a suspect named Thomas Martin Elliott. The Clark County Coroner's Office confirmed Bridgewater was sexually assaulted and strangled to death. Elliott was a man who had no prior criminal record and had managed to evade detection for decades. He had been living a quiet life, but genetic genealogy revealed his name as the prime suspect in both murders. What was even sadder was that he had already died by the time the world learned about his crimes. It was a shocking and horrible truth because no one knew much about him at that time. But soon, they are going to know about him. To confirm their findings, law enforcement exhumed Thomas Elliott's body in October 2023. The DNA from his remains was tested, and it was positively confirmed that he was the killer of both Teree Becker and Sherry Bridgewater. This final piece of evidence provided long-awaited closure for the families of both women who had spent years grieving and wondering if they would ever see justice. For Teree Becker's family, the news that the killer had finally been identified brought a sense of relief, though it could never fully erase the pain of her loss. In January 2024, a disturbing new detail about Thomas Martin Elliott came to light, which revealed a long history of violent crimes that will haunt over decades. Thomas Martin Elliott was born on December 14, 1950, to Walter Graham Jr. and Nancy West. After Nancy divorced Walter, she remarried James A. Elliott, who later adopted Thomas. This made it harder to trace his genetic DNA as his legal surname changed. Thomas Elliott spent much of his life cycling in and out of the prison system. Before being linked to these two murders, he had committed a burglary in Lakewood, Colorado, for which he was sentenced and served a 6-year prison sentence. While in prison, he was transferred between various correctional facilities, and after his release in 1981, he quickly went back to crime. Shortly after his release, Elliott committed another serious offense, this time involving a child, which resulted in another prison sentence. Yet, despite his violent behavior, he was eventually released again in 1991, this time in Las Vegas. That same year, he went on to murder Sherry Bridgewater. Not long after the murder, for reasons that remain unclear, Thomas Elliott took his own life on October 30, 1991. He was buried in the Southern Nevada Veterans Memorial Cemetery, as he had a brief enlistment in the military. For years, his violent past had not been connected to the murders of Teree Becker and Sherry Bridgewater. His name had never come up in the original investigations, and the cases remained unsolved until DNA evidence and genetic genealogy finally linked him to both crimes. For David Becker, Teree's brother, and the only surviving family member, the closure that finally came was something he never expected to see. Now living in Texas, David expressed a deep sense of gratitude towards the Westminster Police Department for their dedication. After 48 years, he couldn't believe that DNA evidence had finally linked the killer to his sister's case and brought some much-needed closure. The fact that the person responsible would no longer be able to harm anyone else brought him a sense of comfort, and knows that no other family would have to go through the same pain. After his identification, authorities began looking into other unsolved cases to see if Elliott could be connected to other crimes. Investigators are now working to examine cases from across the country and are hoping to find more answers for families still searching for justice. Thomas Martin Elliott's identification as the killer also underscores the importance of DNA in law enforcement and offers hope to many other families of unsolved crimes. Although Elliott's death in 2023 meant he wouldn't face trial, his identification brought some measure of justice.
He doesn't really have much memory besides that. He's just thankful that the chapter's kind of closed on this for the family.
Well, it just goes to show you this is why they don't give up on these cold cases decades after. Well, thank you for that.